but powerless to help.
My brother come down there to see about us, but he couldn't come into camp. So I went down in the bushes to see him. And while I was down there, one of them soldiers walked up on me. Get up. Put the pistol on me. And my brother had a pistol too. Now my brother wasn't a refugee, but my brother put the pistol on him and made him leave me alone. And of course my brother hit the road, came on back to Greenville. But it was some awful times.
A week into the flood, life in the camp was becoming unbearable. Beyond the lines of tents, thousands of starving livestock shared the narrow stretch of levee. Dead animals were thrown into the foul water. The stench was overwhelming. When the first Red Cross supplies arrived in Greenville, they were not distributed on the basis of need.
The whites would take what they wanted or give it to who they want. Naturally, the whites had better means of getting it.
First come, first served with the whites. Blacks, they were at the end of the line. They got whatever was left. Sometimes there was nothing left.
The National Red Cross grew concerned about Will's leadership and launched a secret investigation into profiteering and theft in Washington County.
Will lost control of the situation. There were ultimately 154 refugee camps run by the Red Cross. Greenville, Mississippi became the single worst refugee camp of 154.
Leroy Percy was not there to help his son. He was crisscrossing the country trying to rebuild the Delta's finances. To falter or fail now, he warned, would mean the abandonment of an empire. In June, 2 months after the Mound's Landing break, the flood finally started to recede. Some residents began returning to their homes. More and more boatloads of Red Cross supplies were now arriving on the levee. Will desperately needed laborers to unload the cargo. Once again, city blacks were pressed into work gangs.
They forced them into the service, and I think they could have gotten enough without it. But that was the only way they knew, and that was the quick way to do it, by force.
I became a dictator, Will recalled. But the consciousness that my judgments were often wrong was a continuing nightmare.
There was just all this internal hostility. He could not take this frustration out on his father. Will had been humiliated, and in his humiliation, he began to humiliate the black men and women and children on the levee. And there was no place else for this frustration to go.
An influential black newspaper proclaimed that Will Percy's prejudice against blacks is as bitter as gall.
2.5 months into the flood, racial tensions came to a boil.
There was one black gentleman who had actually just gotten off the levee after working all night. He had gone back to his house to sleep. The police were going through the black neighborhoods looking for men to bring back to the levee. A police officer went up to this gentleman on his porch and told him to get in the truck.
He told him, "You go to work," and the answer was, "No, I've been to work." So he says, "You're supposed to work, go when I tell you. And the man got up to go in the house, and he shot him down on his front porch. And I don't think it was a black person with dry eyes in that town.
All of a sudden, the whole city is electrified, incredibly tense over all of this. There is a real fear in the white community, who are vastly outnumbered, that there is going to be a race war.
Will Percy marched into the center of the storm. He called a meeting of the black community at a local church. When he arrived, the church was empty. One at a time, the black leaders began to enter. Amid an uneasy silence, Will rose to the pulpit. The quiet poet suddenly transformed himself into an angry preacher. "You sit before me, sour and full of hatred," Will declared. "You think I am the murderer. I am not the murderer. That foolish young policeman is not the murderer. The murderer is you. Your hands are dripping with blood."
It was the most amazing speech that he could have made to the African American community. After all they had endured, after all the work they had done, he told them that the city of Greenville had saved them. The city of Greenville had fed them. And how did they pay white folks back? They paid them back by being lazy, being indolent, and refusing to work. He demanded that they all get on their knees and pray to God to forgive them for the murder of that poor black man. And if you're going to keep your heel on the neck of thousands and thousands of people and keep them as downtrodden laborers, ultimately you can't be nice about it. And that's what Leroy Percy knew when it came down to it. And that's what Will Percy was finding out and going along with.
The fragile bond between the Percys and Delta blacks was broken. "Our people have the most troubling road to travel," Leroy wrote to a friend. "Some will be able to make it. Many, broken and discouraged, will fail." In a year and a half, Leroy Percy was dead. His dream of empire swept away with the torrent of water. Shortly after his speech at the church, Will Percy resigned as head of the Greenville Relief Committee. The following day, he left the Delta for an extended trip to Japan. He would return to Greenville to rebuild his father's plantation. There, Will would live and die in the house where he was born. He would never write poetry again. For many African Americans, the flood of 1927 marked the end of an era and the start of a journey. As the Mississippi River finally retreated to its banks, they began heading north.
When you go north, there were chances of work, getting something. If they had remained there, with cotton 50 cents a pound and meat, meal, and molasses, how long could they have existed?
So many people wanted to leave here to go to Chicago. And I believe some of them rode free, so many of them got on the trains. Here in Greenville, you had the train was at ground level, and they were just all around waiting, pushing to get on the train. I sure didn't want to go to Chicago. Everybody was going but me. They just knew they were going to the promised land.
A great river of humanity was flowing out of the Delta. Within a year of the flood, tens of thousands of sharecroppers would turn their backs on the planters of the Delta. The exodus Leroy Percy had feared so long could not be stopped.
There's more about the flood on American Experience Online. See footage of the 1927 flood and compare it to other Mississippi River disasters. All this and more at PBS Online, pbs.org, America Online keyword PBS. American Experience is made possible by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to enhance public understanding of the role of technology. The foundation also seeks to portray the lives of the men and women engaged in scientific and technological pursuit.
At the Scotts Company, we help make gardens more beautiful, lawns greener, trees taller. If there's a better business to be in, please let us know.
Liberty Mutual Insurance is a proud supporter of the American Experience. And by helping people live safer, more secure lives, we're also proud supporters of the American Dream.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
This is PBS.